Welcome back everyone, I'm Eric from Rare Candy, and here today we are kicking off a brand new series on the channel focused on taking a look into the past of the Pokemon trading card game and taking a look at different cards and mechanics that I personally really want to see make a return to the game. And for this first entry, we're going to be taking a look at 10 different abilities that I really want to see return, and largely speaking, no particular order as well. And since the designers of the Pokemon TCG, for better or for worse, do like to reuse ideas and mechanics over the years, whether it be in their original form or even updating them for a slightly more modern context, there is actually a chance that some of these abilities could wind up making a comeback in some sort of future set. And, who knows, maybe Creatures Inc., the company who makes the Pokemon card game, will watch this video and get some ideas for some cool abilities to bring back into the game at some point. Now, even though this video is focused on abilities, I am opting to include both Pokemon powers and Pokebodies on this list as well. So if you're a newer player to the game and unfamiliar with those mechanics, Pokemon powers were effects that you had to manually activate, and Pokebodies were passive effects that were perpetually activated. Starting with the black and white era of the game though, these two mechanics both started being housed under the ability term that we now have today. The only rules I'm going to put in place for this countdown is that each Pokemon can only be represented once, as several Pokemon throughout the game's history definitely seem to be given more love than others, and it would be pretty easy to make half this list just comprised of different Gardevoir cards, just as an easy example. Also, I'm only including abilities that are not closely represented already, meaning even though Uxi's setup Pokemon power is marginally different than that of Crobat V's Dark Acid ability, they both fill the same role, and including Uxie in this context kind of defeats the purpose of this whole video. But if you guys do end up enjoying this video series, be sure to give this video a like, as it genuinely really does help get this video seen by more Pokemon TCG fans on YouTube. And at the end of this video, be sure to comment down below and let me know what abilities you want to see make a return as well. But moving on to our actual countdown, we do have a couple of honorable mentions that we're going to go over before we get to the official 10 abilities that I want to see return to the game. Both these honorable mentions were selected by different patrons over at patreon.com/rarecandytcg, and the first one is going to be Psychic Recharge, of course, on the Malamar that recently did rotate not too long ago, all the way back from Forbidden Light. So Malamar's Psychic Recharge ability said, once during your turn before you attack, you may attach a Psychic Energy card from your discard to one of your bench Pokemon. So of course, ever since Malamar has left us, we really haven't had the best Psychic Energy acceleration. Some of the better options we currently have at the time of recording at least are going to be like the random Rotom, then other weird things like Porygon Z and Aurora Energy, stuff like that. So yeah, Psychic's definitely very lacking. And I do think this is actually one of the abilities that does have a better shot at coming back, since if we do look throughout the history of the Pokemon TCG, there are plenty of these abilities. Granted, not usually for Psychic type, but usually for a variety of different types. Some of the more notable ones are going to be Electric, Bronzong, and Blaziken. All of these cards very impactful in their respective formats, save for the Blaziken reprint that we got. It was definitely much better when it originally released back in Ruby and Sapphire. And while not everyone was a fan of the Malamar deck, we definitely do have a vacuum in the Pokemon TCG right now for this type of effect. Moving on to our next honorable mention, this one was chosen by our patron Vince Mallow, and he selected the Premonition ability on Gallade from Breakthrough to make a return at some point. Gallade saw play in a number of different contexts, and Premonition is one of the main reasons for that. Premonition says, once during your turn before you attack, you may look at the top 5 cards of your deck and put them back on top of your deck in any order. So when Gallade came out, there were a variety of different decks that did opt to make use of this. When it first released, we did see a Gallade Octillery deck. Octillery had an ability that allowed you to draw until you had 5 cards in your hand. So of course, you could easily manipulate your top deck, then draw into the exact card or cards that you want to. For similar reasons, we did see some people attempt to play Gallade with Zoroark GX for its trade ability to draw cards. And that's just in the case of this card's ability. It also saw play for its attack as well. But of course, guys, today we are focused in on this ability. And there are a number of decent cards in the current format that would actually pair nicely with this. You know, we still have Cincino in the format. We still have Pidgeotto in the format. And there's even a support Pokemon or two on the official top 10 list that would pair nicely with this ability as well. So Premonition, definitely a solid ability that would not hurt to come back to the game at some point. But those are going to be our only 2 honorable mentions for this list. If you guys want to have your honorable mentions make it into our next video, be sure to check us out on patreon.com/rarecandytcg. So be sure to check us out over there so you can have a bigger say over our content in the future. And also, it really does help support this channel in the process. But moving on to the official top 10 that we're going to be looking at, the first one's going to be a very seemingly random one, and that's going to be the stance change and form change abilities that we've seen in the past on different Aegislash and Deoxys cards. These are essentially the same ability with only some minor sort of changes here. Stance change says once during your turn before you attack, you may switch this Pokemon with an Aegislash in your hand. Any cards attached to this Pokemon, damage counters, special conditions, turns in play, etc. remain on the new Pokemon. And Deoxys is the same, but in this case, you search your deck instead and put this Deoxys on top of your deck instead. I personally have always loved these abilities. Deoxys had a ton of these printed both in the EX era and also the Diamond and Pearl era as well. From what I recall, I don't believe any of them ever were competitive. Same for Aegislash, but I think this is a great mechanic and I think could really lend itself to some unique deck building concepts. The big problem with these cards, their attacks really haven't been too good. So if they were to bring these abilities back and just buff their attacks a little bit better, I could easily see a really cool deck being based around these cards. I mean, Aegislash in particular is such an easy card to sort of make a concept for. You know, imagine these cards coming back, but instead of these mediocre attacks, maybe you had the more defensive Aegislash have an attack that walls against Pokemon V and V Max. And maybe the other one has an attack that does significantly more damage if they are a Pokemon V or V Max. This is just off the top of my head, guys, so they could easily bring this back in a much more creative way and also a much more competitive way, more importantly. Coming in at number 9, we're going to be looking at Energy Evolution on Eevee. Energy Evolution, I think this is actually an ability that they should just perpetually print. I don't think we should ever have an Eevee format that doesn't have an ability similar to this. But it says whenever you attach a basic energy card from your hand to this Pokemon during your turn, you may search your deck for a card that evolves from this Pokemon that is the same type as that energy card and put it onto that Pokemon to evolve it, then shuffle your deck. And while the most recent printing of this card was all the way back in Sun and Moon base set, we actually have seen this ability in Pokemon Power throughout the years, going as far back as the Neo era of the game. So this is another one of these cards on this list that is definitely very possible that could make a comeback in some sort of future set. We're definitely not going to stop getting evolutions, and as long as that's the case, I think we need an ability similar to this to remain in the game. Evolution decks in general need all the help they can get, and having an ability like this would really go a long way to helping those EV decks being a little bit more viable as well. So Energy Evolution, I think this is an ability that should basically be in the game for as long as we have evolutions, if I had my way at least. Coming in at number 8 is a card I feel like most people probably won't even know existed, and that's going to be the Overzealous Pokebody on the Delta species Ludicolo, going all the way back to Crystal Guardians. So if my memory serves me correctly, this was not a particularly good card when it came out back in Crystal Guardians, but this is a Pokebody that, if updated in a modern context, could be a really good ability to have in the game now. But the original one says if your opponent has any Pokemon EX in play, each of Ludicolo's attacks do 30 more damage to the defending Pokemon. So obviously we can take this ability, update it to include Pokemon V, VMAX, etc. And now we have a pretty good ability on our hands. Ideally, not printed on a stage 2 as well if we have the choice. So anything that gives one prize decks more support, evolution decks more support, is something that's always a win in my book. And that's really going to be at the heart of a lot of my choices that are going to appear on this list. I'm mainly going to be looking at cards that help evolution in single prize decks and abilities that just add unique mechanics to the game that would make the game more interesting and fun. This definitely falls into the category of helping one prize deck. So if we could see this Pokebody on Ludicolo get reprinted on maybe like a stage 1 ability, that would be sort of my ideal pick for a card like this, but that's going to be why Ludicolo's Overzealous Pokebody is coming in at number 8. Coming in at number 7, we have Wonder Tag on the now rotated Tapu Lele GX. Wonder Tag said, whenever you play this Pokemon from your hand onto your bench during your turn, you may search your deck for a supporter card, reveal it and put it into your hand, then shuffle your deck. It's no secret that Tapu Lele GX was one of the most format-defining cards of its time for this Wonder Tag ability. Not to mention it did have a couple of okay attacks as well, but the ability is really what boosts this card to stardom. And this ability has seen play over the years as well, most notably in the form of Jirachi EX from Plasma Blast and Lapras going all the way back to Legend Maker. Though I think Tapu Lele's Wonder Tag has probably been the most successful implementation of this ability. I really love effects like this because so frequently there's certain supporter cards that you don't want to run in very high count. So think of a card like Leon that we have right now, or Channeler just as an example. These are cards that we don't really want to play in high counts because you just generally don't need them in 3 to 4 counts, like something like a Professor's Research. But finding them on the turn that you want is something that is kind of a pain sometimes, and abilities like Wonder Tag really make some of those one-of supporters that certain decks want to play more viable than they otherwise would be. It also makes setup-based supporters like things like Sonya or Professor Oak's setup more viable, just because those are cards that you want to find on very specific turns, and beyond the first couple turns, they're not that great. And playing something like Tapu Lele GX can help with that, as we've seen as Wonder Tag numerous times found itself searching for cards like Bridget or Professor Elm's Lecture of the past. So even though Eldegoss V does fill a similar sort of role in the current format, I think this is different enough to where I want to see Wonder Tag come back and would really allow a unique flavor to a lot of decks right now. Coming in at number 6, we have the Forest Curse ability on Trevenant. This is going to be the Trevenant all the way back from the base XY set. And it says, as long as this Pokemon is your active Pokemon, your opponent can't play any item cards from his or her hand. Now, some of you may be screaming at your screen right now because I know item lock is, not the most popular effect or the most fun effect to go against. But I've always felt that this ability was very, very balanced on Trevenant. Even though it is a very oppressive effect, it only does work when Trevenant is your active, and since we have cards like Boss's Orders and Fion right now still at the time of recording, we can actually get around this if needed, making this effect, I think, pretty balanced. And we've seen this effect, even despite your opponent being able to play around it, see a lot of success in the past. The Trevenant archetype was its own deck. We even saw for a brief period of time a Shaman EX Trevenant deck right when Roaring Skies came out. We've seen Trevenant paired with Excelgor. And even looking at past incarnations of this card, it has seen play even prior to this card's release, most notably Gothitelle in the more recent past. And also going back further, we have cards like Kabutops and Vileplume EX with very similar effects as well. And right now in the current state of the game, there are a variety of very strong item cards that decks are reliant on. So not only things like Quick Ball, but also things like Metal Saucer, Switch, Turbo Patch, Reset Stamp, Fire Crystal. The list goes on, and I think having ability like this to slow down some of these item-reliant, aggressive decks that we have in the format would be a pretty good thing to have make a return. Coming in at number 5, we have Alakazam's Pokemon Power Cancel, going all the way back to Mysterious Treasures. And side note, this is actually the last time we had a Stage 2 Alakazam. So it has been forever, and I would love to see not only Alakazam come back, but this effect along with it if possible. So for this Pokemon Power, it said once during your opponent's turn, when your opponent's Pokemon uses any Pokemon Power, or in the case of today, an ability, you may discard 2 cards from your hand and prevent all effects of that Pokemon Power, but this still counts as that Pokemon using its Pokemon Power. So of course we can easily update this effect to just work for abilities. And while I'm actually perfectly happy with Pokemon being a card game that doesn't have a ton of effects that get activated on your opponent's turn, I don't mind a handful of these sorts of effects, and definitely makes the game a little bit more interesting instead of only being able to activate certain abilities on your turn. There's so many times when an ability like this can be massively disruptive. Think of something if your opponent is about to play a Dedenne GX and Dede change their hand away. Maybe they don't have a supporter in their hand and they are relying on that ability to carry them the rest of the way and draw some cards for the turn. And now if that's their only out to drawing cards and you have the option to just discard 2 cards from your hand and stop that right in its tracks, that's a massively impactful effect that we have here. And not only Dedenne, also think of things like Intrepid Sword on Zacian V, Dark Asset on Crobat V, Stellar Wish on Jirachi, the list goes on and on. This is a very annoying effect, and one I would be very happy to see make a comeback at some point, whether it be on a stage 1 sort of Pokemon, that way it's more easy to get set up and get into play, or maybe on another stage 2 like Alakazam, but maybe just with a better attack. That way a Pokemon with this ability can also be a deck of its own as well. I do wish we had a couple more of these effects where we could interact on our opponent's turn as well, and that's why Alakazam is going to make it up to the number 5 spot. Coming at number 4, we have the Cosmic Power Pokemon Power on Claydol, all the way back from Great Encounters. So this Pokemon Power says once during your turn before you attack, you may choose up to 2 cards from your hand and put them on the bottom of your deck in any order. If you do, draw cards until you have 6 cards in your hand. And though we have seen other Pokemon in recent years and recent formats somewhat similar, kind of like Octillery, kind of like Zebstrika, even now we still have things like Pidgeotto and Cinccino, I don't think they're actually near as strong as this Cosmic Power. And the reason I would love to see this come back is mainly because we saw Claydol's Pokemon Power here help a number of different Stage 2 and Evolution decks get set up. And that's one thing where we are kind of lacking right now. Now, of course, Stage 2 and Evolution decks do have some other challenges in the format outside of their consistency, but Clay Doll would just be another piece of the puzzle to maybe help these decks get set up a little bit easier. The fact that you can lower your hand size with this ability is really what makes this effect so strong, because we've seen cards like Bianca and also Lily in more recent years as well. Very frequently, these draw until you have 6 effects, sometimes only end up drawing you maybe 2, sometimes 3 cards, just because it can frequently be difficult to get your hand size down low enough to actually get good draw. And that's not really an issue for Clay Doll, since you can actually lower your hand size with this thing, which is why Clay Doll is going to take our number 4 spot. Coming at number 3, we have the Forest Murmurs Pokemon Power on Torterra level X. Once during your turn before you attack, if you have more prize cards left than your opponent, you may choose one of your opponent's bench Pokemon and switch it with one of the defending Pokemon. And while we currently, at the time of recording, do have plenty of gusting effects still in the format, whether it's Pokemon Catcher, Great Catcher, Boss's Orders, Fione, etc., I really like this sort of effect specifically because it benefits slower, more setup based decks, usually which are going to be evolution decks. And as you guys know, that's something I think really does need a big boost in the game right now. Now, if this ability does come back, it does need to be on a Pokemon that is much easier to get in play, as Torterra was effectively a stage 3 evolution when it was printed. So if this does come back, I think it needs to be on either a stage 1 Pokemon or on a stage 2 that also has a good attack of its own as well. Because I don't think this is going to be good enough if it's just on a stage 2 that has a bad attack, or if it comes back in some sort of similar stage 3 level up or break mechanic like this. But I think this would be a great ability to just always have on your field if your opponent ever does get a little too aggressive. So this will punish decks like Eternatus, like Zacian variants, like Pikarom, all of those decks that have these very explosive turns and put on very fast aggressive pressure. Guess what? Our single prize decks, our slower, more methodical setup based decks now have a chance at still gusting whatever they want and taking those sort of options away from the more aggressive decks. So even though this list is largely unordered, this is actually one of the abilities I probably would have ranked pretty high if this list was more strictly ordered either way. So Forest Murmurs is going to come back at our number 3 spot. Definitely an ability I would like to see return. Coming in at number 2, this is an ability we haven't been without for too long, but one I am already very sorely missing, and that's going to be the Almighty Evolution ability on Ditto Prism Star. So this said, once during your turn before you attack, you may put any stage 1 card from your hand onto this Pokemon to evolve it, but you can't use this ability during your first turn or the turn this Pokemon was put into play. So I have to say, Ditto Prism Star is actually one of my favorite cards of all time. I think this card was so amazing for evolution decks and one prize decks, because a lot of times you find yourself like when you're setting up at the beginning of the game on your early turns, it's like, well, I run multiple stage 1s and I can probably get 3 basics this turn. But for my 3rd basic that I'm going to get down, is it going to be of this stage 1 or this stage 1? And if I commit to 2 of this one and my opponent has a Boss's Orders and knocks out the other one, I don't have my other stage 1 that I can evolve into. And Ditto Prism Star fixes those sort of plays, because you can always grab each of your stage 1 pre-evolutions plus a Ditto. And Ditto even allows you to run other stage 1 lines that you sometimes really wouldn't commit the space for, just allowing a lot more flexibility when deck building for stage 1 in one prize deck. So yeah, absolutely love this ability. I'm heartbroken that it's not in standard anymore. I think it's actually probably one of the best abilities we've seen for evolution decks of all time, and one that I definitely really want to make a comeback at some point. Now, unfortunately, this ability is probably only limited to Ditto cards, because it really wouldn't make much sense just thematically if another Pokemon had this sort of ability. So it might actually be a while before we get this specific effect to make a comeback, but definitely one I'm rooting for, and I really do want to see come back into the game at some point. And taking the number 1 spot for our final ability that we want to see make a return, that's going to be Ectoplasm on Dusknoir level X. So at the time, this was a Pokemon Power, and it said if Dusknoir is your active Pokemon and would be knocked out by damage from your opponent's attack, you may discard all cards attached to Dusknoir level X and put Dusknoir level X as a stadium card into play instead of discarding it. This counts as Dusknoir being knocked out, and your opponent takes a prize card. As long as you have Dusknoir level X as a stadium card in play, put 1 damage counter on each of your opponent's Pokemon between turns. If another stadium card comes into play, or Dusknoir level X is discarded by the effects of any attacks, Pokemon Powers, Pokebodies, Trainer, or Supporter cards, return Dusknoir level X to your hand. And while the actual act of just putting 1 damage counter on their Pokemon is fine, That's actually not really what made me want to put this on this list. I just love the nature of this ability, of this effect. I think the Diamond and Pearl era in general is actually one of the most creative points for the Pokemon TCG. There are tons of cards during this time period that had very unique effects like this. I mean, in today's state of the game, you would never see Pokemon print something as creative and inventive as this sort of effect. You know, in today's format, Pokemon just wants to print big dummy aggro basic decks that take no sort of thought process whatsoever and just make them hit hard with no interesting other side effects. This is definitely not a card that would be printed in today's era of the game, and I think that is such a shame. So of course, I'd be happy to see something like Duskmoor come back where you take a Pokemon and treat it as a stadium card, but I'd be down for any effect, really. It doesn't even have to be an effect that spreads damage counters. It could be something else entirely, but I just really want a return to more creative card design like Ectoplasm here. I think this is a great example of the sorts of creativity that we've seen at different points in the Pokemon TCG, and I am desperately clamoring for cards like this to make a comeback at some point. And with that, that's going to wrap up 10 abilities that I want to see make a return to the game. Now, I know a lot of you guys are probably claiming I missed something, and I did. I actually had a list of probably close to 20 different abilities that I wanted to see make a return, but of course, it's a top 10, guys. I'm only going to pick 10 here, and that's where I leave things to you to sound off below in the comment section. Tell me some of the abilities that you want to see come back. I'm sure a couple of them are ones that I also want to see. So start that convo down below in the comment section. And of course, guys, as you saw, both of our honorable mentions were picked by our patrons at patreon.com/rarecandytcg. So if you guys want to make it into future entries of this series, check us out on Patreon, get your voice heard, and get into our next video, especially since it also genuinely does help this channel in the process as well. But that's going to be it for today's video. I hope you guys did enjoy this look into the past of the Pokemon TCG. If you did, of course, smack that like button and subscribe to the channel. And if you're able to, consider supporting us over on Patreon like I already mentioned, or you can pick up some merch from our online store at rarecandytcg.com. It would mean a lot. But as always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.